A dislodged crawfish creates a powerful feeding instinct in bass in both rivers and lakes. Well, getting the presentation just right can lead to days like this where bass keep biting and biting. We are going to break down what I call tumbling for bass in both natural rivers and lakes or reservoirs so you can trigger this powerful feeding behavior. On my most recent trip, it didn't take long to figure out that the smallmouth were holding in the heaviest current we could find. And don't worry, as I mentioned in the beginning, we will go over this for lakes that do not have strong current like a river. Anyway, to give you an idea of how strong that current was, I have an 80-pound thrust trolling motor on an 18-foot aluminum boat. I would often need to have that motor set to 70% to hold steady or barely move against it. And the other challenge was the first few smallmouth we caught doing other things like throwing a crankbait and spinnerbait in this heavy current, those fish spit up very small crayfish. I mean about the size of your thumb. In other words, we needed to imitate small crayfish that were randomly losing their hold on the rocks and bouncing downstream or tumbling. Fly fishermen are experts at this type of presentation. So we tied on little Ned baits on one of 3 different rigs, the jig rig, a weedless Ned head, or a standard Ned head. They all worked great, and we did not use extra heavy jigs like you would think would be necessary. The key was to throw way past our intended target so the lure had time to hit the bottom, and then let the current do all the work so the lure would tumble. Now sometimes my brother and I would have to pop the lure or drag it a touch to get it off a rock, but the goal was to always let it naturally tumble along. Now if we take a look at this footage I had from fishing a different river years ago, you can see the effect we were going for. This little Ned lure gets swept downstream, stopping for a second or two, and then continuing to bounce along. Now look at this footage of smallmouth in heavy current. They are extremely close to the bottom. We want our lures to stay in that general range. When we take a look at the rig used in lakes, it will make sense how and why we keep that lure in that target zone. Now, what about if you are fishing water like a lake or reservoir that doesn't have current like this? Well, the first thing I want to do is find areas that have the most water movement you can find in that lake, preferably up against rocks, but it doesn't have to be. My absolute favorite is where boat wakes keep washing up against the shoreline, and if that isn't available, then looking for the heaviest wind can really get things fired up. Now, of course, we can use a traditional Ned setup, no problem. But I want to try and mimic a crawfish getting dislodged and becoming super vulnerable. That's the key, vulnerable for a second or two, activating the easy meal instinct of bass in the area. Well, there are several ways you can rig this up, but 2 of my favorites are with a bigger split shot. This is a size 0. Or with a worm weight held in place with 2 bobber stops. Now, unlike fishing a traditional leader length that you might use on a split shot rig or a Finesse Carolina rig, we only want a very short distance between the weight and the free floating lure. Remember that footage of the smallmouth holding close to the bottom? Well, this is why. With the very short leader, this will allow us to pop the rod tip, scoot the lure along, pause it for a second, and the lure will only rise up a small amount, then we can move it along again. The hope is that it looks like a craw trying to get back down to the bottom. Of course, this can work anywhere on a lake, but mix in waves crashing into a shoreline, and this extra short leader mimics tumbling crayfish really well. Well, you know me, I love to drag lures, but with this presentation, it is a quick pop of the rod tip that gives the lure that dislodged and helpless look to it. These little stick baits are so powerful for imitating craws, but of course you can put any craw imitator that you prefer on here. I do like the ElasTech because personally I like the lure floating up off the bottom just a little. If you have any experience tumbling for bass, go ahead and drop your comments below. And hey, if you'd like to watch a video that goes over something we often forget about with our Texas rigs, but it is so powerful. Go ahead and check this one out right here, and make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.